Hi, it's me, Andrej. And this is the BMW R 1300 GS. I'll tell you there will be a lot of content with this motorcycle because BMW does it well. Because not only did they do a technical presentation in Germany, which you've already seen the episode on YouTube, but now Mikau is flying out tomorrow for tests in Spain, where he'll focus more on off-roading and cornering, really putting the bike through its paces. And they have it here in Poland as the first one to have it for a longer period. A longer period means 2 days, so you know these are just first impressions when it comes to the R1300 GS. Why so much content? It's simple. This is the best-selling large motorcycle in the world. So it's just as important for BMW itself as it is for the media, because everyone is super, and you, the viewers, everyone is super curious about how it rides. So in short, both the same and different. Here you go. In the last video, I summed up this machine by saying that BMW simply took a list and looked at where they had gaps compared to the competition. And they decided to completely fill every single gap. The easiest way to do that was with equipment. So, you know, we already have the electric windshield, we have the adaptive headlights, which unfortunately I won't be able to test for you because it's very cold here at night right now. I hope Misha will have a chance to ride this motorcycle at night. A lot of Feature 7 automatic lowering of the suspension for shorter people and raising it back up when you ride off. So they basically checked off everything the competition has so that we would have it too, leaving no room for argument. There's even a little compartment here in front of the tank for your keys or remote. It's pretty shallow, just enough for a slim wallet, the remote and keys, but it's there, just like on the KTM and Ducati. And so they kept checking things off one after another, and then came the development of the whole thing. Because we know this is a completely new engine with a gearbox that's mounted underneath, not at the back. A completely new frame, completely new front suspension, completely new rear suspension. The entire motorcycle was simply built completely from scratch. And now I'm wondering whether they made the right move, because this machine as a whole has gone in the direction of the competition. In short, it's simply more sporty, more lively, more energetic. And my first impression when I picked it up and rode it through the city was this really necessary? Because even just looking at the lines, you can see that this motorcycle is much more slender. A lot of weight has been saved there, but you don't save weight on the styling, right? You save weight inside on the components. But when you put the 1250 next to it, this one looks like a much smaller motorcycle, even though the engine actually has a slightly larger displacement. And the question is, did we really need this? Did we need the GS to be slimmer, more agile, sportier? Probably not, but at the same time, yes, because we doesn't mean everyone. When I look at Europe, because let's be honest, this is a bike made for traveling around Europe. The days when we ventured into complete wilderness are pretty much over. Of course, many of us still do, right? Some people still venture into the wild, but in those cases, they usually choose much simpler, lighter motorcycle zones you can really fix anywhere. Or they go on an organized trip into the wilderness and organized adventure where you just hop on a brand new GS, pay the fee, get on the new GS, and don't worry about a thing. You just ride through the wild and then come back home. So when you look at Europe, Italy, Germany, southern Spain, when I think about the best roads in the world, then that sportier character really starts to make more sense. You have to know that these differences are actually quite significant. If I hadn't been riding the GS 1250 for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and I didn't know this was the new one, and I got on it with my eyes closed, started riding, I'd probably say, okay, well, yes, it's basically the same, but the sum of these small differences really makes you experience this motorcycle different. It's more lively, it revs up more eagerly. Surprisingly, it also handles corners more willingly. And that's kind of strange because when I was riding in the city, my first impression was, you know, that nimbleness, that quick, agile feel. The GS is unique in this regard because, you know, the low center of gravity, those cylinders, and anyone who rides a GS knows that it's one of the easiest motorcycles to maneuver at low speed. I was riding it in the city and I thought to myself, damn, it feels different. It's like, it's a bit less eager to be nimble, to flick side to side. Then I got here and started riding on overpasses and taking corners. And it was clear that the mass must have shifted a bit higher up. The suspension geometry is simply different. The swing arm is longer. That's one of the reasons the gearbox was moved down to allow for a longer swing arm. And once we put this motorcycle together, it still leans into corners much more willingly. And I suspect that on some alpine passes or down in southern Sardinia, or really anywhere in Sardinia, which I think has the best roads in the world, will be absolutely enchanted by how it rides. But I'll leave that to Michał, who will get to ride those twisty roads in a few days. So overall, it feels much livelier. The engine is incredible, and once again, it's a step forward, 145 horsepower, so more power. And as I ride this engine around the city, even in road mode, when I open the throttle, it's so eager, like I want. Do I really need such a responsive engine in this type of motorcycle? Because this isn't a sport bike. It's a touring bike. It's supposed to be comfortable and smooth. But later, when I took it out of the city and was riding at speeds over 50 kilometers per hour, this engine is just incredible in terms of its character and the smoothness of its power delivery. It's a bit less beefy, if you know what a beefy engine means, than the 1250. But it revs up so eagerly, it's so lively, almost in a way that's not typical for a GS. If you think about GS models like the GS 1150, which were just ultra sluggish, like slippers among motorcycles, when it comes to character, there's a huge difference. The 1250 is a bit livelier, but it hasn't lost any low-end torque. In fact, it has even gained some, and that's it. BMW still doesn't have the highest power compared to the competition, but I actually checked the torque values. The Multistrada V4 has 125. The KTM is absolutely badass, super powerful. I love that motorcycle. 138 Newton meters. Here it's 149 Newton meters. With this motorcycle, we don't even need to go above 4,000 or 5,000 RPM. It just goes boom, boom, boom. It'll keep pulling. And in this case, once we go past those revs, we're already entering the power band. It used to be that you'd give it some throttle and you'd get torque, but then sudden poof, it would run out. Here, you still don't get that crazy rush when it comes to maximum power, but it keeps going. But you no longer have that feeling that it's bogging down. It just accelerates like crazy and maintains a steady acceleration. I was riding calmly during these tests because I still have a broken ankle, so I definitely decided not to take it off-road and plan to ride gently. But I couldn't resist. I had to try popping the clutch a little. And wow, I was really surprised. The previous one surprised me because I could come out of a corner in third gear and it would lift the front wheel. Here, it happens even faster when I press the clutch in third gear, twisted the throttle and released the clutch. It just shot up so hard, wow. I think we could easily lift it in fourth gear. I don't know who would do that on a GS, but I suspect a bunch of teenagers in South America. If you've seen those kinds of videos, the fire coming out when exiting corners and then the control, the modulation of that engine, it's just unbelievable. This Boxer engine has been refined to perfection. Honestly, as I said last time, I don't know what more could be done. You know, what they'll do is just make it even livelier and more powerful, but the character remains the same. Just as enjoyable. The gearbox. And here, I don't really know what to tell you because I'm not sure if I'd be lying or telling the truth, since I haven't ridden the GS 1250 for about a year, maybe a bit less, but it seems to me that the gearbox there felt smoother. I mean, just the act of shifting gears, because as usual, the quick shifter in the BMW is brilliant. You can shift up and down, but actually not really, because I have a broken ankle. I mean, I'm almost at the point where it's not broken anymore, but I still have trouble lifting that foot up. It seems to me that this lever operates with more resistance than in the previous model, but that's a question for those who have ridden both the old and the new one, or who have a 1250 and have tried the 1300. Let them answer how big that difference really is. Because this motorcycle is still not broken and it has, I think, 70 or 80 kilometers, maybe 100 kilometers on the odometer, so I don't want to mislead you here. But if I had to decide right now, I'd say I prefer the previous gearbox, because it was, you know, refined to absolute perfection. Maybe here there's still a bit of work to be done, but it seems to me that the clutch is now more responsive. So, these are the tiny differences I'm trying to find for you, and you can either refute or confirm them. Handling, I've already talked about the handling characteristics. The front suspension, I still don't think that the telelever is the best suspension in the world. Okay, it's very stable, and that's great that it's very stable. If I had to choose for my own riding style, I would still go with a conventional fork, but here, well, there is progress. There is progress when compared to the 1250. What they said wasn't a lie, you do feel the front wheel a bit more. We specifically chose corners with bumps and potholes for the recording, so we could feel as much as possible. And it's a tiny difference, but for me, for example, it's very important because if I ride a lot on the track or just in general, I like to have that feedback, that information from the front wheel. So again, it's a small difference, but it's noticeable, and I actually like that. Similarly, the absorption of small, short bumps is also definitely better. It's not a huge difference again, because the suspension design is what it is, but you no longer get those sharp hits or jolts. At least I didn't feel them on these roads. I've only been riding this motorcycle for 1 day, so it's not like miracles are going to happen. It seems to me that there's a chance here for a major improvement in the situation. That's a question for Michał. Let's focus on having him do a more off-road test and really put this motorcycle through its paces. When it comes to off-roading and gadgets and things like that, it's always about raising and lowering the suspension. Believe me, that's an option, because in this motorcycle, practically everything is an option. This is a masterful piece of equipment for making money for BMW, because the base model costs 86,000 zlotys. We tried to configure the most expensive version possible just to see how high we could go. It came out to a little over 120,000 zlotys, but by then the ideas were already getting a bit silly, and that's before adding accessories, because what happens when we start throwing in accessories? I think if we really focused, we could easily hit 150,000. There's an absurd number of windshields to choose from. But let's get back to the suspension. That lowering suspension and the semi-lifting one, that's an option, of course. Normally, the motorcycle only has semi-active suspension, meaning it automatically adjusts the damping, compression, and rebound while riding. That raising and lowering feature, honestly, well, since I have a fractured ankle right now, I actually like it, because I can pull up and stand with my whole feet on the ground, and as I ride off, it lifts itself up. You don't really feel it rising, but you definitely notice when you stop that it lowers itself. It's actually pretty clever. If someone needs this because they don't have long legs, or they always carry a lot of luggage and a passenger and want stability, then it's actually not a bad idea. But I don't know about its durability, how it works over time, or what servicing it later will be like. Will it end up costing a fortune? I don't know. But there are some cool gadgets like the Enduro Pack, and the Enduro Pack, as far as I know, has suspension that's higher, because there are so many of these packs that it's easy to get confused, and it no longer has that lifting or raising option. For example, it gets rid of those ridiculous handguards with turn signals, which is actually nice, because then they're removed and the turn signal is moved here to the front in the standard spot next to the headlight. Because if you hit those handguards off-road, they'll probably break, and then you won't have a turn signal, and so on and so forth. This probably also applies to parking lot tip-overs, unfortunately, although I haven't dropped it myself. Another plus with the GS is that, the force is always distributed a bit, because the bike lands here first, and as you can see, there's even a little piece of plastic. So maybe they won't give in that easily, but in my opinion, it's not a very fortunate place for a turn signal. Adaptive cruise control. Another feature they've checked off, and it works. I simply tested it, and it works. The brakes work too. I joke that the calipers are in the same color as the old Brembos, the racing ones. Now, the BMW calipers have exactly the same paint job. Of course, there are also two options, and everything in the configurator is called either Evo or Pro. But the brakes work great. They're very powerful, but the feel for me is just so-so, especially since I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I tend to use the rear brake a lot when riding a motorcycle, and when I use the rear brake here, I can feel the pressure changing at the front master cylinder as well. Sometimes when I stop, I feel like it kind of engages, and sometimes it stiffens up. It's just that smart system responsible for stability, the ABS and those ride stabilization systems and so on. It's definitely safe. Probably, or rather definitely, it's smarter than us when it comes to various critical situations. But being a traditionalist means that you control how much braking force goes to the rear and how much to the front, because that's how I've driven my whole life. Well, it's like, you feel some strange things happening there, and well, it brakes. Overall, when it comes to the fundamental principle of stopping, everything functions precisely as it should, but the overall feeling is a bit peculiar and somewhat strange. What else is strange about this motorcycle? What's strange is that the gauges, or rather the interface, haven't been changed because the gauges themselves didn't really need any changes. Since it's a display that's practically in all BMWs, it works great, very, very smoothly, very clearly. But come on, they could have changed the interface because, you know, you have a whole new motorcycle, everything's wow, wow, wow. You press the button and you get exactly the same display as in the 1250. And yeah, and that's the thing you interact with the most. Of course, they added a sport display so you can measure what lean angles you had, because obviously that's the most important thing, especially when you're riding for touring. But that's kind of a bad thing too, because someone will want to break records in the Alps. And let's be honest, sometimes you just can't cheat physics, but the interface could simply be a bit different. Navigating the menu itself isn't exactly the easiest either. You just have to learn it. When you go into the deeper engine settings, traction control, there are just a billion things. In the end, there are descriptions of what each thing does, but in my opinion, the interface could be clearer. And I think the competition has more user-friendly menus in their motorcycle. Well, it's a matter of getting used to it. What I was worried about and afraid of was that my favorite button in the world disappeared, the button that turns off traction control, which only BMW has. Surprisingly, no KTM, no Ducati has a single button like that, where you can just hold it down while riding and traction control turns off. For example, there might be a situation where you need to quickly turn off traction control while riding off-road to get up a hill, or maybe you're irresponsible like me and sometimes just spontaneously decide to lift the front wheel of the motorcycle, which I don't recommend because it's stupid. I only do it when the area is empty, and well, these days when someone is standing there, they just stare blankly. At most, maybe a moose could see it, and ideally you should only do this on a racetrack anyway. Back to the point. I was afraid that this button was missing, but it's just hidden, because now there are new features: window adjustment, seat heating. I mean, these aren't really new features, but there are just a lot of options now. So we have what's called a multi-function button. You press this multi-function button, use the dial to select which option you want the two additional up and down buttons to control, and then choose which function will be operated by the up and down button at that moment. And there you can set it so that the button controls traction control, but it can also be assigned to suspension mode, raising the windshield, heated grips, and similar functions. At first I thought it would be complicated, but in practice I've actually ridden with it. It's just a click, click, click. Besides, you just set it to the function you use most often, and that's it. So yeah, that's how it is. These are my first impressions, but they're pretty detailed. Will this motorcycle once again be the best-selling bike? Yes, it's simple as that. You can already see it from the orders. This is a GS. Those who had the GS will buy a GS. Rental companies will buy the GS. Tour companies will buy the GS. Yes. Will this motorcycle be a problem for the competition? Yes. Because, listen, every time I hear it, I'm at every manufacturer's presentation and they say, here, we want to take on the GS, and then the GS comes in and, you know, does its magic, and everything the competition has, it has too, and it just rides well. It rides incredibly. This motorcycle might not necessarily be for everyone, because it rides differently than the motorcycles we're used to. So, you know, it's not like this is the best-selling motorcycle in the world. It's the best motorcycle in the world. Well, no, because it won't necessarily be the best motorcycle in the world for you, since, for example, and this is important, it even sounds bad, even with an exhaust. This Akrapovic, which is funny because it's probably even heavier than the original one, since it probably meets some new imaginary Euro standards, is so quiet a standard that a lot of sounds reaches from the engine and the chassis, all sorts of things, and I really miss that deep bassy growl, that thump, boom, something like that. Or maybe another motorcycle could sound a bit better. Of course, you can certainly modify the exhaust system, but not every country will actually do that, because some people truly believe in homologation and simply won't break homologation regulations. They just absolutely won't do it. So that's all I have to say about this machine. I'm both happy and not happy about not riding it off-road. I regret it, because off-road, it seems to me like with every GS it probably won't shine as usual. Because once again, it's likely to be a motorcycle for getting through off-road terrain, not for having fun in it. But maybe I'm wrong, and that's why Michał is flying to Malaga, and the next video will probably be about how the GS rides off-road, because maybe it will be a surprise. What intrigues me the most, what I'm most interested in, is how this motorcycle, compared to the previous one, handles those slow maneuvers, weaving around roots and doing those tricks, all of that. Because here, oh, the previous one might actually be better. I don't know, please let me know what your thoughts are. For now, I truly think the BMW GS is absolutely great. It's a remarkable motorcycle that is still distinctly different from all the other motorcycles currently available, and now it genuinely has everything that the rest of them possess. That's it. Take care. Bye. The hazard lights turned on. Emergency. Emergency braking. This is the newest button, the so-called multifunction button. First, you press this button, and then you use this button. Come on, you need to turn on Dynamic and Dynamic Pro. There are quite a few settings, right?